The armor remembers. The first time a god remembered my name, he was dying on a surgeon's slab and did not know who I was. There is a smell I cannot describe to anyone who has never breathed it. It is incense first, heavy and resinous, like the cathedral on the world where I was born. They burned it on holy days there, and I remember how the smoke scratched at my throat while my mother said, "He sees us." Then machine oil. Not the dirty kind that reeks from the hands of old mechanics, but the clean kind, almost medical, the oil we call blessed, the sacred oil of the mechanicum. It arrives in tall dark vials sealed with wax, and it is opened only with prayer. And then the third smell, the one with no beautiful name. Old blood, not fresh blood. Fresh blood smells of iron. Anyone who has ever broken his nose knows that. Old blood smells different. It bites into the microscopic cracks of ceramite so deeply that no solvent takes it out, no fire, no prayer. Although I still say a prayer every time I take up the brush. From habit, from 50 years of habit. That is the smell of the armor of the Astartes. I have known it for 37 years. Sometimes I dream of it and then I wake soaked in sweat, because in the dream I am always young. I stand on the threshold of the apothecarian. I am 14 years old and they have not rejected me yet. They have not written me off yet. They have not turned me into a man with a rag. In that dream, I think every time that this time will be different, that the osmodula will take. That apothecary Malrek will look at me not as a broken instrument, but as a future brother. But the dream always ends the same way. With pain in the bones. It was dark in the arsenal that night. Lumen strips on the ceiling flickered. Somewhere in the engine section, routine maintenance was underway, and power was being redirected through the ship. I was alone. The right pauldron of Captain Kaler hung before the central rack. 42 centimeters of cast ceramite, carved with the image of an ice ridge, the emblem of our chapter. Heavy as a grave slab, beautiful as a grave slab. I had been holding it in my hands for 3 hours, polishing a scratch. A ricochet from a bolter round, fired by one of our own during the confusion on Varkal. I saw the pick sensor record myself. 14 seconds of combat in a ruined hangar. The scratch would remain. I had known that from the first hour of work, but I kept polishing anyway, because it gave my hands something to do at 3 in the morning. And then I did what I sometimes do, when I know for certain that no one can see me. I lifted the pauldron and set it against my own shoulder. Heavy, impossibly heavy. My joints began to ache at once. That was the memory of the night in the apothecarian, of the osmodula that burned through me from the inside and left without finishing its work. But I held it there. 1 second. 2, 3. In the dimness, in the mirror shine of polished ceramite, I saw my face. A bald skull, scarred from the back of the head to the left temple. The mark of the probe that went too deep when they pulled out the failed implant. Bags under the eyes that would never leave. An apron smeared with oil. 70 years lived, 40 of them here in this hall with this cloth. I put the pauldron back, took a fresh rag and continued polishing. My name is Elian. I have served the chapter, longer than many Astartes within it have lived. I have never killed a Xenos in open battle. I have never stood beneath the alien sky of a foreign world in full war plate. I am not the first in the attacking line, nor the last wall of a defense. I am the one who prepares the first and the last before they step out. I clean the armor of gods. And if you think that sounds humble, like an admission of failure, like the confession of a man who has surrendered, then you are right, partly. I did surrender. But not as broken men surrender. I surrendered as those surrender who resisted for a long time and grew tired. And in that tiredness, I found something almost like peace. Today, for the first time in my life, I will tell what it is truly like. Not as in hymns, not as in the sermons of the chaplain where everything shines and smells only of incense. As it truly smells. Morning aboard the unyielding Absolution does not begin with dawn. There is no dawn here, only a change in lighting. At 4:30 by ship time, the lumens in the living compartments shift from red to white. I feel that change even through sleep. 40 years of conditioned reflex. The body wakes before the mind has time to wake. My cubby is a niche in the bulkhead near the captain quarters, 3 meters by 1.5. A fold-down cot that creaks in 2 places. A tool locker with a brass latch that I oiled once, then forgot, and now it opens with effort, as if on purpose, as if even the locker wants to remind me that I am no longer as precise as I used to be. A shelf with 2 books, a worn manual on the care of vestments, and a battered book of hymns I have carried since my home world. My mother gave it to me before I left for the trials. For luck, she said. The book is still with me. As for luck, I do not know. I rise and pain comes at once, not the sharp pain that makes a man cry out and clutch at the place. This is a background pain, chronic, like the hum of a reactor, the kind you stop noticing but that never becomes silent. The spine, 3 vertebrae that fused the wrong way. The left shoulder, the shoulder blade deformed in the apothecarian. The knees are only old age, nothing heroic. The osmodula worked in my bones for several hours before my body rejected it, and those several hours marked the rest of my life. Every morning is a reminder. You were chosen, but you did not pass. You were good enough for the trials and not good enough for completion. That sounds like resentment, but it has not been resentment for a long time. Only a fact. Facts stop hurting after several decades. Almost stop. Wash at the basin. The water is cold. Hot water is saved for the Astartes. They have regenerative requirements. They need hot water with decoctions. It is written in the regulations. I do not. Put on the robe, tie the apron, check the tools at my belt. Brushes in 3 sizes, oil in a small vial, polishing stone, a key of 3.7, all in place. I go. By 5 in the morning I am already in the captain chambers. Kaler stands in the center of the room. He always stands. Astartes rarely sit without need. A body remade for war treats a horizontal position as vulnerability. Even at rest, they keep their backs straight, as if they were taught to stand before someone always greater than themselves, or as if they themselves are always greater than everyone nearby. Kaler looks at the wall. He is not meditating. I know his meditation. His eyes are closed then, and the catechism moves on his lips. Now he is simply waiting until we do our work. There are 3 of us, me and 2 others. Selin is a young woman of about 25, quiet and exact in work. Her world paid the chapter in bodies as a tithe, and she chose the ship over the mines. And old Bran, who has served the chapter 10 years longer than I have, and who long ago stopped speaking of anything except work. Each of us has our own area of responsibility, silently assigned without any order, simply settled over the years. Bran, legs and lower back. Selin, torso, breastplate, gorget collar. Me, arms, pauldrons, helm. We move around him in silence. Each knows his place. Each knows his bolts. First come the pads of compressed synth fiber, worn directly over the skin and over the black carapace. That last of the 19 implants, a neuroreactive subcutaneous interface that pierces the back and flanks with a web of tiny sockets. It binds the body of the Astartes to power armor directly through nerve signals. Without it, power armor is only an expensive metal coffin. I know this from books. I have never felt it from within. Then plates, greaves, knee guards, each with a double click. The first locks, the second confirms. Thigh plates, the breast cuirass in 2 halves, the back plate. Selin works quickly and exactly. She has good hands. Bran grunts as he lowers himself to one knee, His back is not what it was either. I take the right pauldron, the one with the scratch. Yesterday was Varkal, I say. It is a bad habit to break the work silence, but sometimes a man must speak words aloud simply to make sure he is still here. Second squad lost 3, Sergeant Roden. His gene seed was preserved, Kaler says. His voice is like the movement of tectonic plates, low, even, almost without intonation. Not feelingless, only economical, every word measured. Brother Apothecary, Orvin extracted the proglans before we had to fall back. Rare fortune in such a fight. I know, I say, I helped move the body. A pause, I lack the left pauldron. Captain, I say, my voice betrays me, lowers a little. Do you remember when we hunted ice serpents by the northern ridge as boys? You had a knife with a wooden handle then. You carved it yourself from white larch. We sat in ambush for 2 days and still waited them out. And the servo drive in the left shin, he interrupts. During movement over broken ground yesterday, there was a delay, 0.3 seconds, adjustment required. Bran immediately lowers himself to one knee and draws out the diagnostic probe. Selen, key of 3.7, he commands. The conversation is over. It always ends like that. In the middle of my sentence, without explanation, without pardon, I am occupied. The next question concerns the work, and the space my words occupied collapses as though it had never been there. I fall silent. I tighten the fastening of the right pauldron. My fingers know every bolt, every groove. I can close my eyes and my hands will work by themselves. 40 years of memory in the joints. We were both from Nereth, an ice world on the edge of the system, where winter lasts 8 months and grass in summer grows to the ankle and dies at once. I remember him as a boy. I remember how he wept after his first killing in the trials. His rival stumbled, Kaler struck, and afterward he sat over the body and cried quietly, thinking no one saw. I saw. I told him it is right, that is how it must be. I lied, but that was the lie he needed in that moment. Now he is almost 2.5 meters tall in full vestment, a mountain of muscle and armor that does not see the man at its shoulder, or sees him the way it sees a bolt fastening. Present, functioning, good. I lower the helm onto his head, the final piece. The lock closes with a soft gut-deep click, well-fitted parts. The face of my childhood friend vanishes behind a mask of death. Complete, Selen says. Kaler takes 3 steps toward the door, then stops without turning. The scratch on the right pauldron is not fully removed. I will see to it tonight, I say. The door closes, heavy metal against metal, not a slam, not a knock, finality. I stand in the empty chambers, incense and oil in the air, marks from his magnetic boots on the floor. I take a rag and wipe them away. Bran straightens with a groan. He looks at me in silence, with an understanding that is worse than the absence of it. Old men sometimes understand too much and too little. Selen leaves quickly. She still has 3 suits of armor before breakfast. I remain a minute longer. I look at the empty center of the room where he stood a moment ago. The place still seems occupied. The air has not yet filled the shape of his body. Then I take the brush and continue working. I must tell this, though I do not want to. It is the part of the story I turn over in my head every night. Not because I want to, but because it comes by itself, like pain in the spine when pressure changes. Uninvited, familiar. There were 127 of us. Young men from Nereth, gathered from across the world in 2 months. The chapter recruits every few years when the time comes. 3 figures in black robes arrive on riding beasts, and whispers begin in the villages at once. The chapter is looking. Families with boys of the proper age feel something between pride and terror. Pride because to be chosen is an honor sung across centuries. Terror because no one comes back. not as an Astartes and not as the self he used to be. Kaler and I were chosen together, though he was a year older than me, and they took him with our stream because the chapter was closing losses after a hard campaign. The trials lasted 2 years. I will not describe them in detail, not because there is nothing to describe, but because that is not the story I want to tell. I will only say this: those who survived, survived. Cold, hunger, combat against other candidates, hunting, marches without sleep for 3 days. The first killing, the second, the third. They come faster each time because slower means death. We lived on the northern ridge of Nereth in conditions that an ordinary city boy would not survive. But we were not city boys. We were Nereth-born, where every third child fails to reach adulthood because of cold and hunger. We knew how to survive. They were only testing whether we could do it better than others. There is one night I remember with particular clarity. Only 19 of us remained from the first 127. 19 boys on a frozen plateau, where the wind cut the cheeks like glass. We had to spend 3 days there without food and without fire, with one knife between 2 men. I shared a knife with Kaler. Back then we still trusted each other enough for that. We sat back to back. Through the first night we took turns sleeping in brief snatches, and when we woke the first thing we checked was that the knife was still there. It was reflex. No words were needed. We knew either of us could take the knife and leave and no one would condemn him. The rules allowed it. But we stayed. On the second day he fell ill, something in the throat, fever. I fed him snow and watched to make sure he did not sink into deep sleep. He was angry, said he could manage himself. I did not argue. I simply stayed near. He managed. That was the last thing we truly did together. In the final examinations, I was in the first ranks almost the whole time. Stronger than Kaler, faster than most. I had a good sense for ambushes and for people. I could feel when the man beside me was about to strike first. The eyes changed. The breathing changed. The muscles pulled differently beneath the clothing. It is not mysticism. It is observation, sharpened when you live in constant rivalry. They brought us into the Apothecarian aboard the orbital monastery, a vast construction hanging above Nereth like a second metal sky. When they led us through the main nave toward the operating sections, I thought of nothing but the scale. Ceilings 30 meters high, columns of white stone covered in inscriptions I could not yet read, the smell of antiseptic and something sweetly nauseating. Later I learned to know that smell as living flesh under surgery. Apothecary Malrek explained everything to us the evening before. He spoke calmly, like a teacher during an anatomy lesson, with no triumph, no grandeur. He simply listed things. The first 2 implants, the secondary heart and the osmodula. The secondary heart is insurance. If one stops, the other works. The osmodula is a bone modulator, a small organ implanted at the base of the spine. It begins work after several days. In 1 year, your bones will be stronger than steel. In 3 years, you will withstand blows that fold ordinary men in half. After successful integration, you will receive the next implants. There are 19 in all. Each requires time to take. We listened and nodded. No one asked what happens when the osmodula does not take. They did not tell us. For the first 12 hours after implantation, I felt nothing. I lay in my cell and stared at the metal ceiling. The only unusual thing was a slight pressure at the base of the spine where they had sewn in the modulator, as if something had settled there and was testing the space. Then it began. I speak of pain, and I ask you to believe that I am not exaggerating. It was not pain in the common sense. Not a burn, not a cut, not a break. It was as if someone had driven red-hot rods beneath the skin and begun to bend them slowly, methodically, bending my bones with them. Each vertebra apart, each rib. The fever rose so fast that the next hours exist only in fragments. Faces of medics above me, cold metal of the table beneath my back, my own voice screaming something, then falling silent because the voice was spent. The osmodula had begun too aggressively. My bones tried to rebuild faster than the tissues could endure. 3 vertebrae deformed. The shoulder blade grew spurs. The collarbone formed a chain of bone thorns that later fused crookedly. Apothecary Malric watched the readings, then turned to me. "Defective material," he said. Not cruelly, not regretfully, as one speaks a technical conclusion. Rejection response with destructive pattern. Extract immediately. I was conscious, still alive, still understood everything. Defective material. They removed the osmodula after 16 hours. Too late. 3 vertebrae, the shoulder blade, the collarbone. All of it healed later, but it healed crookedly, the way bone heals when no one sets it. That is where the stoop comes from. That is where the pain each morning comes from. Kaler implant took on the 3rd day, cleanly, without complications. Malric called him excellent material, and Kaler lay in his cell with a faint smile, already feeling himself change. Then came the next implant and the next. Of 40 men, 11 completed the full course. We, the failures, were given a choice. Return home maimed, with the reputation of being unfit for the chapter. On Nurith, that meant nearly the same as being a leper. Some went home. They say it did not go well for them. Or remain and serve. I remain not from devotion but from pride. Crude, stubborn pride, the pride of a man who has been thrown away and refuses to leave. I thought I would be near. I would know everything from the inside. I would be needed. That was my mistake, to think being needed and being important were the same thing. Kaler came to say farewell then. He had already changed during the months I spent in the ward. His shoulders had broadened, his voice had lowered. He shook my hand firmly, truly, and said, "The chapter will not forget that you tried." He was wrong. The chapter forgot, and he forgot too. Or perhaps he did not forget, but moved it into the part of memory that battle does not require. I never learned which was worse. Cleaning the training cage is not work they write hymns about. A hall 40 meters long, with a floor of ribbed metal and walls scarred by bolter rounds and practice blades. Some dents are so deep that I can put a finger into them and feel no bottom. After each training session, there are shell casing, sweat, blood, and sometimes teeth. Neophytes fight at full strength, no indulgence, no softness. I came to the cage 40 minutes earlier than I was supposed to. I wanted to finish before the lessons began, but they were already there. 5 scout neophytes worked with training blades and sparring. No mentor. They were driving themselves. I took a mop and began work near the far wall. Do not look, do not interfere. I had seen enough. One of them, tall, dark-haired, with movements still angular and unbroken, made the same mistake again and again. When he swung, he raised his left elbow too high, opening the left flank. His partner did not yet know how to use it, so the attack passed, and the dark-haired one thought he was good. But I saw it. Somewhere deep beneath the layer of old age and fatigue, another Elian still lived, the one from Nurith who knew how to strike. That inner Elian shouted almost at full voice, "Step right." Catch his right elbow from above, pull it down, and at the same time drive a short thrust with the left under the ribs. I tightened my hands on the mop handle. Then the dark-haired one made a feint and slipped. The training sword flew from his hand in a clean arc straight toward me, and I caught it by reflex. My palm closed around the hilt exactly as it had 40 years earlier on Nurith, when they taught us to handle hunting knives. The hall became silent. 5 neophytes looked at me. The dark-haired boy stepped toward me and held out his hand. I offered the sword hilt first, as proper. He yanked the blade away so sharply that I felt the pull in my shoulder. Do not touch the sacred blade with filthy hands, Serf, he said. No anger, no heat. Only a statement, as if reading a warning aloud from a wall. They returned to training. I returned to the mop. That was when I felt the thing for which I am still ashamed. Envy. Animal, exhausting. Envy of that boy with the wrong elbow, of the death with a name that would one day be his, of the gene seed that would pass to the next generation, of the helm that would stand on a shelf in the reliquary and be cleaned each week by someone like me. He would be remembered, and I would sweep the floor after him. A few weeks later I crossed paths in the corridor with Apothecary Orvin. He was going to the cage for the scheduled assessment of the neophytes. I stepped aside. He passed me, then stopped. Elian. I turned. Orvin looked at me with something one does not often see in the Astartes, something like thoughtfulness. When you passed primary selection, he said, your scores for reaction and spatial cognition were in the top 5 out of 127. I know, I said. There is a hypothesis I am developing for the next recruitment, he continued slowly. In some candidates with unusually high neural activity, the osmodula demonstrates an increased rejection response. Possibly, the nervous system identifies the implant as a threat and attacks it before it can adapt. If this is confirmed, such candidates may be guided by a different protocol. I stared at him. You are telling me this now, after 50 years. He inclined his head slightly. Among Astartes, that is something between a nod and a shrug. I am working on the protocol. Future candidates with such readings may succeed. Good, I said. Orvin walked on. I stood in the corridor with tools in my hands. He had wanted to tell me something by it. I still do not know what. Perhaps he wanted to explain. Perhaps that was what regret looked like in him. With them, it appears as technical data and hypotheses instead of forgive me. Perhaps it was all he could give. That same night, when sleep would not come, I went to the chapter library and read the regulation on the care of vestments. 842 pages. On page 241, the line said, the servant whose care for armor is flawless participates indirectly in every victory of the brother he equips. Indirectly. I reread that word several times, then closed the book and lay down directly on the library carpet, staring at the ceiling. Participates indirectly. So I had understood my life correctly. When the unyielding absolution leaves the warp, it is like nothing else. First comes a silence that presses harder than any noise, as if someone has taken a dirty, torn sheet and thrown it over the sky beyond the ship, and the whole world outside vanishes. That is what the warp is like from within. You feel it even through 3 meters of steel and shields. Some serfs cannot bear it and hide in compartments without viewports. I have almost grown used to it. Then comes the impact, like a fist into the chest. Then the sound. The ship bends like a living creature crossing from sleep into waking, and all the bulkheads sigh metal at once. It seems the unyielding absolution speaks some word in a language no dictionary contains. Then the sirens roar. Then the voice of the watch officer through the speakers. Translation complete. Marvith system, battle readiness. The campaign on the Crimson Heights began exactly so. I was nearing 50. I hurried to the arsenal. The left knee hurts on downward stairs, but movement is necessary, because the first hours after leaving the warp bring the most work. Final inspection of each pauldron, each gorget. Checking bolter magazines by markings and ammunition type. Recharging power cells. Replacing any consumable that shows less than 90% remaining. One must not make a mistake here. Mistakes here are not punished. Mistakes here get men killed. Just not you. The assembly hall. 2 incomplete companies stood in formation. 118 Astartes in full vestment. When they stand like that all together, shoulder to shoulder in armor, an ordinary man begins to bleed from the nose. Literally, not as metaphor. In my early years I walked with cotton stuffed into my nostrils. It is not only the sound, though the hum of their armor is strong enough to make glass tremble. It is the presence itself. They occupy space differently from men, as if each of them possesses an invisible volume extending several paces around him. Chaplain Vor intoned the litany of hatred. He walked before the ranks, and his voice, amplified by augmetics tuned to the proper purity, struck like a smith hammer on an anvil. Even, heavy, unyielding, with pauses in the proper places. We are the wrath of the emperor. We are his punishment poured upon the impure. There is no fear in us, for fear is weakness, and weakness is the first step to heresy. There is no doubt in us, for doubt opens doors to darkness. We are his weapon, we are his hand, we are unstoppable, we are death. I stood by the wall, my lips moved with the others. I knew the words by heart. Repeat them for 37 years and they become part of you, like the scar on the temple. I believed them in my own way, but I thought as I spoke them, this prayer is not for those who stand by the walls. It is for those upon whom the gold of ornament burns, for those whose 19 implants have altered the substance of the body from within, for those whose body is no longer simply a body, but something else, something through which blood moves by two hearts and bones do not break from a bolter strike. I moved my lips and felt like a child repeating adult words without understanding their weight. Then the chaplain stepped aside, and Kaler came before the formation. Not for a speech. He was never one to speak before battle. He simply stood and looked at his brothers. Enough. That was enough. I saw the line change slightly, not by movement, but by something else. By the way they held their weapons, by how they stood, as if he had turned on something inside each of them with one look. I cannot do that. I never knew how to look at men that way. The formation moved toward the hangar. I stood by the rack with spare bolter magazines in case of last replacements. Kaler walked past. I offered him 5 magazines, the ones he always took above regulation, his usual insurance. He took them, checked the markings with a practiced motion, thumb along the end, and set them into his pouches, silently without looking at me. Then he lowered the helm onto his head. The lock clicked, a quiet, gut-deep click of a well-fitted mechanism. Face behind mask. Yellow lenses of the eyepieces looked somewhere over me. He entered the drop pod, the hatch closed. Rows of drop pods filled the hangar, enough to send both incomplete companies down in waves, squad after squad. Red readiness runes burned steady on sealed hatches. Somewhere below, the engines of the orbital bomber thrummed. That vibration traveled through boots into the floor, through the floor into the body, and struck in my 3 vertebrae. 20 minutes later, the launchers fired. One wave after another. I heard the sound through the hull, dull successive blows as if someone were pounding a fist on an iron barrel. Once, again, again. Then silence. I took a broom and began sweeping the hangar. I do not know how to describe waiting when somewhere below, men you know are dying. Not the waiting of a station. At least there is a timetable. This is different. Beyond thousands of meters of atmosphere, beyond the armor of the pods, beyond the walls of alien buildings, those whose bolts you sort by marking are dying. Those whose names you cross from the morning readiness sheet. And you sit by the Vox receiver in the service compartment and listen to fragments. Hold left flank. Brother Callan take position behind. The crackle of interference. 15 seconds of silence. Contact east mass. The cultists have heavy equipment. Repeat crackle. Brother Roden fallen. Orvin to me. Gene Seed. Silence. I wrote names on a sheet of paper, not because I had to. The chapter has chroniclers, a book of the dead, a reliquary, only on a sheet I later burned. It mattered to me that someone speak those names aloud before they became lines in a register. Roden Callan Veyer. I whispered them on the breath, no prayer, just names. In the Serf mess, a young lad everyone called Knox, 18 years old from a mining family on Kilo 6, looked at me across the table. Did you see the captain at assembly? When he passed third squad, his helm was level with their pauldrons. He is taller than all the rest. He is also the one who once chose the wrong position on Varkal, I said. Because of that, the squad lost 3. He opened the left flank, and Roden took the hit in the gorget precisely because the captain ordered the wrong corridor. Knox lifted his eyes. He is Astartes. He does not make mistakes. He made one. I saw the record. Do you think gods do not make mistakes? They do. They simply have no one to tell them. Knox fell silent and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been told something uncomfortable. He does not want to agree, but cannot refute it. You are always like that, he said at last. Like what? Bitter. I took my cup and finished the cold tea. Beyond the wall, the reactor hummed. A continuous low hum, the kind one stops noticing on the 3rd day aboard a ship. I am not bitter, I said. I am accurate. Those are different things. It sounds the same. You are 18. Many things still sound the same to you. Knox took offense, stared into his bowl, then raised his head again. He was the kind who took offense quickly and let it go quickly. Do you regret staying after they did not take you? It was an honest question. I looked at him, at this boy who had found himself for the first time near something great and terrible and beautiful, and I decided he deserved an honest answer. Every day for the first 15 years, I said, then less often, then only at night, then only when something reminds me. And now, regret is a luxury. It takes too much strength, and strength is needed for work. Knox was silent a while, then said softly, I think you are the unhappiest man on the ship. Possibly, I agreed, but the most accurate. We ate in silence. The first Thunderhawk returned after 7 hours. A low, heavy roar of engines, then a dull impact of metal against metal. I went to meet it. They carried them in, 6 men carrying, 1 in 2 pieces, the upper half separately, the lower half laid carefully beside it. Something very large had divided him. The second without a helm, with a face I saw in dreams for weeks afterward. The third walking by himself, limping, one hand on the wall, refusing help. The fourth on a stretcher, unconscious, chest plate shattered, blood bubbling beneath the clamps. Apothecary, Orvan already waited at the entrance. Small by Astartes standards, some of them are more compact than others, his voice like a rasp. Elian, I need the body of Brother Veyer, internal section, table 2, and the small circular saw. Work on a fallen Astartes is its own right. It has a litany, which the apothecary reads aloud while working with the instruments. Its purpose is not comfort. Its purpose is to hold in memory that this is not merely a body. It is a vessel that must be processed correctly, so that what remains sacred in it is not lost. First, open the plates. The saw moves along the seam between breastplate and thigh plates. It takes force. Well-fitted armor does not open easily. Then reach the black carapace. Disconnect it from the nervous system before that system is fully cold. Then the most important thing, the progenid glands. The 18th implant, the one with which everything begins and without which there is nothing. 2 glands, one near the neck, one in the chest cavity. They look like small dark gray formations, irregular ovals, a little denser than the tissues around them. Inside them is the genetic code of the chapter. Inside them are future generations of Astartes, those who do not yet exist. Lose them and the brother dies twice, once in the body. a second time by the disappearance of his genetic legacy from the history of the chapter. I held the body of Brother Veyr while Orvin worked. He had the face of an ordinary man, perhaps 40 in appearance, if one did not know he was Astartes. A thin gray at the temples, almost unnoticeable. A small scar under the left eye, old from the trials. His mouth slightly open, as if he had wanted to say something and had not managed. I caught myself thinking, perhaps he too had someone who told him, "You can do it." Perhaps he too had someone with a hymn book for luck. "Hold him straighter," Orvin said. I held him straighter. After the work, I walked to my cubby through the long corridor, and my hands smelled of antiseptic and something else. I did not wash the smell away at once, perhaps because it was the only way to keep the sense that I had been there, that Veyr had existed, that his passing was not merely a line in the register. They brought Kaler on the third day of the campaign. I knew him by the pauldron, by the very scratch I had never fully removed, the scratch I had polished for 3 nights in a row. The armor was torn open, not along seams, not at joints, torn as if someone had taken a piece of plastic and pressed it inward with a thumb. The left side was open by 20 centimeters. Later they told me. A dark apostle with a staff charged by warp energy, one of those things chaos makes from a man if the man devotes himself to that god long enough. Not all at once. Slowly, methodically, service for service, until the man fails to notice that he has long since stopped being a man. The apothecarian was overflowing. Orvin moved between 3 tables. Kaler was laid in a side alcove on a folding platform, and they said, "Wait, we will return." I stayed. Not by order. Selin had gone to the arsenal, brand for tools, and I stood by the wall and understood that I could not leave. This man lay there with his side torn open, and only I was near. For the first half hour he was unconscious. I sat on a metal chair and listened to him breathe. Loudly, with a rasp, like a piston in an engine without proper lubrication. Then more evenly, then rasping again. Then he began to speak. First, formation commands clear, as if he were in battle in that very moment. Third squad, position on the right flank. Brother Callan, east approach, fire when ready. Then the blur, words that were no longer orders. Only sounds leaking outward by themselves from that layer of memory, usually hidden beneath all the others. Snow. Cold. Then quietly, almost inaudible. Mother. Not a word, a sound. I did not move, I listened. His hand, huge, calloused, powder under the nails, moved across the surface of the platform, seeking something, not finding it. I stood and took his hand. My palm in his was like a splinter in a fist, as if he were holding the hand of his mother, though he was unconscious and was holding nothing. Only reflex, only a body used to holding weapons. "I am here," I said, softly. "Everything is all right." A lie, but there is a proper time even for lies. His hand closed. Weakly by the measure of Astartes, quite noticeably by the measure of an ordinary man. "Elian," he said. Blurred, not as address, but as memory. As if he spoke a name lying somewhere deep, beneath the layer of years and battles and gene seed and everything done to him. My name, for the first time in perhaps 20 years. Not Serf, not you, not a correction about work. My name. For several seconds I could not speak. At the edge of the platform lay his bolt pistol. They had taken it off while carrying him here and set it aside mechanically, as men set keys on a table. Black, heavy, with engraving on the casing, "Death to the impure" in his name. I looked at it for too long, longer than I should have. Honest thoughts come at moments like that, the kind one is ashamed to remember in the morning, but that were true. I thought, you lie here, and you are weaker than I am. Right now, in this minute, weaker, without armor, without the implants that doubled your muscle, without the black carapace that makes you something more than human. You are a boy from Nerith with a torn side, and you said my name because somewhere deep down you still remember who Elian is. You simply cannot reach that memory when you stand upright in armor. And I also thought I could take that pistol. Just hold it, feel the weight, it is not difficult. I did not take it. I only adjusted the pad under his head, found a med kit by the wall, took out analgesic gel, and applied it to the abrasions where the armor had torn skin around the neck and wrists. Not because it would heal anything important, but because my hands had to do something. After an hour, Orvin came. Leave. I went out into the corridor and sat on the floor right there, back against the bulkhead. The metal pressed into those 3 vertebrae. Familiar pain. Behind the wall, the surgical engine began to work. The monotonous business-like sound of a precise machine. I sat and did not pray. I simply sat and thought not of lofty things but of specific ones. That in the morning I had to check the arsenal. That brother Lucen Pauldron had become a little loose in the left lock after Varkal, and I had meant to tighten it for 3 days but kept putting it off. That tomorrow, by schedule, 2 reserve terminators needed routine lubrication of right leg servomotors. That was not cowardice, hiding in the small from the great. It was what I know how to do. When nothing can be changed, do what you can. Over 37 years, that became reflex. Perhaps that is what separates service from mere work. Behind the wall, the surgical engine changed rhythm. I did not know what that meant medically. I only listened. Then I stood. I went to the arsenal to check the pauldron of Brother Lucen. On the 5th day of the campaign, the enemy reached the ship. This happens less often than one might think. The chapter had not lost the unyielding absolution in 200 years, but then something went wrong. Cultists disabled one of the void shields through infected crew members who had not been checked thoroughly enough, a matter that later became the subject of long review and several executions. A transport barge with boarding teams jumped straight to our hull at 5 in the morning. The sirens howled so loudly that my ears began ringing at once. There were almost no Astartes on the ship. Most were below. The wounded were in the infirmary. In the central sector, a few Terminators remained in reserve, and they still had to be armored and sent in the proper direction. That required time. We Serfs had to protect the arsenal and infirmary block ourselves, as best we could. I took a shotgun from the weapon rack. Not an Astartes bolter. Without a brace I could not hold one. Its recoil is calculated for a body with 19 implants. A pump shotgun, crude, 8 shells. About the kind they use on Nerith to drive ice serpents away from livestock pens. Beside me stood Selin, silent, with a short automatic gun. Knox with the pipe of an industrial extinguisher, and 3 more serfs who took whatever lay in the nearest crates. We hold corridor Delta 7, I told them. No farther, not until the real ones come. Selin looked at me, Knox nodded, the others simply took their weapons. 12 minutes of waiting is a long time when you know they are coming. In the darkness of corridor Delta 7, it was possible to hear how somewhere far away, first very far, then closer, groups of men moved. Footsteps, sometimes voices, sometimes gunfire in other sectors. That meant the Terminators were not yet here. They were still occupied in other directions. I held the shotgun in both hands and thought that if they broke past me into the infirmary, there was one apothecary and several wounded who could not protect themselves. Kaler was there. Selin stood to my right by the wall, a good position. She had found an angle by instinct from which she could fire without fully exposing herself. Knox took the left with the extinguisher at the ready, face pale but angry. The other 3 spread behind crates. I thought, this is it. This is what I waited for. Not this, of course, not in this form, but something like this, where I stand before something important instead of behind it. They came after 12 minutes. Ordinary men infected by heresy, painted in the colors of their god. Dirty clothing, crude tattoos, weapons, some with lasguns, some with knives, some with things built from scrap metal. There were about 20 in our corridor. The lighting was already flickering. I killed the first with a shot to the chest from 15 meters. I will not make heroism of it. There was none. I was so afraid my hands shook and the first shot went low. The second hit. After that there were only separate frames. Recoil into the shoulder. The smell of powder. Someone screaming. Selin beside me, shooting steadier than I did. Knox knocking down two who came closest with the extinguisher. Not killing them but throwing them down, creating a pause of 5 seconds. Knox fell beside me, struck unconscious by something blunt to the head. I stood over him. The shotgun was empty, no time to reload. I gripped it like a club. The infirmary door was behind me. Behind that door, Kaler lay helpless and alone. The first cultist reached me, and I met him with the stock under the jaw. He fell. The second, I turned away the knife hand, took a fist to the cheekbone, stayed standing, seized the door frame. The third raised a lasgun. And then light moved down the corridor. The searchlights on Terminator pauldrons are their own kind of experience. Broad, cold, blinding, like winter sun on the snow of Nereth. 3 figures in heavy tactical dreadnought armor, each as wide as a cabinet, each carrying weapons that took up a third of the corridor. They moved slowly. They did not need to hurry. Everything before them either ran or died. Less than a minute passed. One of the Terminators stopped beside me. His gaze slid over the empty shotgun in my hands, over Knox unconscious at my feet, over the closed infirmary door behind me. Then he moved on without a word. Without a single word, as if I had not been there. I stood in the quiet corridor with a broken cheekbone and watched them go. Selin lowered her weapon, and her hands were shaking. One of the serfs was weeping softly without noticing. I crouched beside Knox. His pulse was even, alive. "Did you see," he said a few minutes later, opening his eyes, "how they walked, like angels?" "I saw," I said. "Stand up," I said. "We have to clear the corridor." 3 weeks later, the chapter completed the campaign on the Crimson Heights. Several cities ceased to exist by methods that hymns do not sing about. I learned this indirectly, because the Astartes returned not triumphant, but quiet. Orvan drank alone in his compartment for 3 days. For an Astartes, that means something. There was a ceremony aboard the ship. The great hangar, draped in chapter banners, the ice ridge on a dark field. Kaler stood before the formation in full armor. New cybernetic replacements covered the place I had seen open 3 weeks before. His voice, amplified by the Vox system of the helm, carried through the hangar evenly and solemnly. He named names. Those who had distinguished themselves, those who had fallen, slowly with pauses after each, those who must be remembered. I stood in the back row, where the serfs stand, behind the right shoulder of the formation near the wall, where the searchlights shine weaker. Selin was with me and about 40 other personnel. Some had bandages, signs of the boarding. My cheekbone was broken and already yellowing. I did not expect my name. Expecting it would have hurt too much, but I attended just in case. I listened as Kaler spoke the names of the fallen. His voice did something special to names. Each name in his mouth became heavy, weighty, as if he were placing a stone on the scales. Vayer Roden Callan. 8 others I knew less well but knew. By bolts, by habits of equipment, by scratches on armor. Names I had written on sheets and burned. Now the captain spoke them aloud for the whole formation. Something in me wanted to be offended by it, as if he were taking something of mine, but I suppressed the feeling. It was small, and I knew it, and I still felt it. That is true as well. Kaler finished naming the Astartes. A brief pause. Then, ship personnel ensured the proper functioning of all vital systems under combat contact. Duty fulfilled. That was all. Beside me stood a young serf I had never seen before, apparently from a technical section. He watched the ceremony with the shining gaze I knew well from Nox. When Kaler finished speaking of the personnel, the boy turned to me and whispered. He spoke of us. Personnel fulfilled duty. That means us too. Yes, I said. That is good, right? I looked at him, at his shining eyes, at the way he stood slightly on his toes so he could see better. Yes, I said again, that is good. Let him keep that feeling a while longer. Everything else will come by itself with time. The formation began to disperse. I went toward Kaler, not quickly, because walking against the flow of armored men more than 2 meters tall is no simple thing. At last, I reached him. I touched his elbow gently. Captain, I said. He stopped and looked down. In corridor Delta 7 during the boarding, I was at the infirmary door. I held the position until the Terminators came. I stood there with an empty shotgun because behind that door. Elian, he interrupted. Yes, I said. Before deployment, you gave me assault magazines instead of armor-piercing. I discovered it only on position, when the first 2 rounds behaved against the light armor of the cultists not as they should have. In another battle, that could have become critical. It did not. Do not repeat this error. And he walked on. I stood in the emptying hangar, banners overhead. He had not seen me at that door, did not know I had stood there. For him, there had simply been a closed space that the Terminators cleared in passing, while I stood there with an empty shotgun because behind that door lay he, unconscious, helpless, calling my name. Selin came from behind and stood beside me. For a long time she said nothing. Beside her, I noticed that she too had aged across the years. First lines near the eyes, first gray at the temples. We had both grown old on this ship while they remained the same. You knew it would be like that, she said at last. I knew. Then why? I thought, truly thought, not for a beautiful answer but simply. Because I could not do otherwise. She nodded and said nothing more. We went to the arsenal. Armor must be removed and cleaned after ceremony. This is not discussed. It is only the next item on the list. That was 14 years ago. Now I am past 70. My hands no longer hold a polishing disc steady enough. By evening, my fingers curl by themselves like leaves in autumn frost. Senior Serf Eamon, one of the few people on this ship who look at me as a man rather than as a tool with a name, transferred me to the reliquary. The storage of chapter trophies, banners, and written testimonies. A quiet, cool compartment almost always empty. Shelves with the helms of fallen brothers, crates of captured weapons, sealed cases with documents. My work now is to maintain order, keep the inventory, wipe the shelves. Good work, quiet work. 3 weeks ago they assigned a young man to me. He had come from Nurath. I recognized the accent at once because he swallowed the endings. Tall, fair-haired, shoulders slightly asymmetrical, the right a little higher than the left. He had passed the trials, reached the apothecarian, received the first implants. Then rejection began in the biscopia, the third muscle implant. It managed to rebuild half his musculature before they removed it. Now his right arm is almost twice as strong as the left. His movements are asymmetrical, and no training will correct it. He will never wear armor. His name was Theron. He stood before me and looked at the floor with an expression I once saw in my own mirror. A mixture of anger, loss, and despair pretending to be anger, because anger keeps a man straighter than grief. He clenched his fists, the right harder. Do you know what that is? I pointed to the shelf behind his back. 38 helms with name plates. I clean them each week. Behind each is a man who did what was required of him to the end. I do not want to clean other men's helms, Theron said softly. I know. I found a chair and sat. My knees no longer allow long standing. I was in the first ranks during the trials, faster than you most likely. After the rejection, the apothecary looked at me and said, defective material, as one speaks of a broken part. Then for 50 years I stood beside the man for whose sake I stayed in the chapter. I stood before a door with an empty shotgun, and that man did not once ask me by name, except when he raved after being wounded. That sounds like a warning. Those are facts. It would be a warning if you had a choice. Theron was silent, then raised his eyes. An angry, living gaze, the gaze of a man who is angry because anger is all he has left. Why did you stay then? Why should I not go home? I took the helm of Brother Harren from the shelf, the oldest in the reliquary, 212 years. Campaign at Carmora, the Tyrannid Wave. 18 minutes alone, 17 confirmed kills in the records. I have cleaned it every week for 8 years. I know every scratch. I know where each came from. Because I was young and foolish, I said, and because my friend went forward and I did not know how to fall behind. That is stupid. Of course it is stupid. Most decisions made when you are young and stubborn are stupid, but they still determine an entire life. Theron looked at the helm in my hands. You know the story of each one. Each one. Brother Harren, this one came from Astartes, a plain world, grain farms, nothing remarkable. He spoke little. According to brothers who served with him, he was among the quietest in the chapter, but he held the position for 18 minutes. What happened at the 18th minute? Reinforcements arrived. Theron changed slightly in the face, only slightly, but I noticed. And that one. He pointed to the helm 2 places away. Name plate, Brother Malden Reith. 140 years ago, I said. The only survivor after the destruction of his squad. 8 days alone on a hostile world before they found him. Then he lived another 60 years and died in battle as he should. You remember all this by heart. I have read the dossier of everyone who stands here. When you wipe a helm, you want to know whose it is. Theron looked at the shelves differently than he had a few minutes before. Something had changed in how he held his head. That is much work, he said. Yes. No one asked you. No. I placed Harren helm back on the shelf, carefully, as always. Someone simply had to know more about them than what is written in the register. Someone had to remember that they were men before they became something greater. Theron stayed silent for a long time, then said quietly, Is that what you meant, your place? Perhaps yes. A pause. Listen to me, I said, setting the helm back. You are angry, good, keep that anger. It will warm you in the first years. Then it will grow quieter, and then be careful because quiet can be worse than anger. Then you must find your place in this work. Something small, personal, that does not require being seen. How did you find it? Slowly, I said, very slowly. At first I simply worked. Then I began to notice details, every scratch on armor. Where did it come from? Then I began to know men by the way they wore their equipment. Then I understood that I know these brothers differently than they know one another. They see one another in battle, in formation, in prayer. I see them vulnerable, without armor, with pain in the joints, with fevered words after wounds. That is a different knowledge, not better, different. And it is enough for you. A long pause. No, I said honestly, not enough. It has never been enough, but it is what I have. Theron looked at me, and I saw something in him change. Not submit, change. Redistribute itself, like weight in a pack when you understand the road is still long and the load must be arranged differently. Otherwise, the chapter will not forget that you tried, I said suddenly. What? That was said to me when I chose whether to leave or remain. The one who said it believed it sincerely. Remember this. It is not true, the chapter will forget. That is not cruelty, it is scale. When you live and fight across the scale of millennia, one man in a corridor by an infirmary door becomes very small. Just know it in advance. It is better than learning later. Theron nodded slowly. And what then, if the chapter forgets what remains? I looked at the 38 helms on the shelf, at the container on the lower shelf, the one into which I would later place Ash. What remains is what you remember yourself, I said, and that may turn out to be more than it seems. A few days later, Eamon informed me that my personal file had been forwarded for administrative reinterpretation of function. A chapter euphemism, soft, like all euphemisms hiding something hard. It means I will be written off, sent to an agricultural world or an archive or another ship. Eamon, it seems, is trying to negotiate the last. He is a good man. Or I will be unlucky. Unlucky is the word servitor, which I do not say aloud but which lives in the head. Partial lobotomy, mechanical replacements. You are still you somewhere behind your own eyes, in the part they did not reach, but you no longer control anything. Only an apparatus with the face of a man, who once ran across the snow of Nurith. I have seen servitors up close many times. They work on the ship alongside us, only without words, without initiative, without a gaze that looks at you. Their gaze looks through. Sometimes I caught myself staring into their eyes, trying to find someone there. Someone who still remembers what it is to fear, to be angry, to laugh, to refuse a cup of cold tea because you do not want it. Someone who still wants something or does not want it. They say the oldest servitors sometimes weep. Apothecaries say reflex, residual neural activity in the limbic system. Residual means there was something that remained. I prefer not to think about it. Not because it is frightening, though it is frightening, but because thinking about what you cannot change is meaningless. That is another thing the arsenal taught me. On the last evening before filing the report, I came to the reliquary late at night, lit the duty lamp, sat at the desk, and opened the lower drawer. Inside lay half a sheet of thick paper, folded 4 times, a picked image. A chapter chronicler had taken it 39 years ago on Nurith, during the farewell ceremony for candidates. The last time we were photographed as future brothers, not future serfs. In the image were 2 boys, one tall, fair-haired, eyes wide open, a little frightened though trying not to show it. The second slightly shorter, already beginning to go bald, looking straight into the lens. Standing as people stand when they are used to looking at everything directly because they know no other way. Kaler and Elian, Nurith. I held the image for a long time, looking at that second boy and thought, he does not know yet. He thinks everything will be different. That closeness to gods means something. That closeness is not the same as distance measured in pauldrons. He will follow them, remain near, spend his whole life standing by another man's shoulder and stay anyway, because he will not know how to do otherwise, because he is a son of Nurith. And on Nurith, no one leaves the field until the work is done. I lit a corner of the pict from the lamp. The paper burned slowly and quietly. Good thick paper burns with almost no smoke. When it was done, I swept the ash into a small metal container, one of those used for insignificant archival fragments. I closed the lid and set it on the lower shelf beside the helm of Brother Heron. Let it lie here, among those who are remembered. They say the Emperor protects. I believe it. In my own way, I believe it. Not as Chaplain Vor believes, whose faith is like a smith hammer, straight, heavy, without gaps. My faith is different, quiet. The faith of those who have no witnesses except him. The faith of people who work in the dark, in silence when no one watches, and who have no one to say to them, I saw, you were here. This is what I understood in more than 70 years. The Astartes are a price. A vast, impossible price the Imperium pays for its existence every day. They are made from men, from boys of worlds like Nerith, from those who could run faster than others and bring down an opponent with bare hands. They are made and lifted so high that mankind becomes something distant to them, blurred, a childhood memory remembered less clearly than 1,000 battles. I do not blame Kaler. He is not a cruel man. He simply works at a scale where one serf in an arsenal corridor is too small to hold focus. When you carry the weight of history thousands of years old across centuries, when you watch brothers die, when you destroy worlds for the survival of the Imperium, one friend from an ice world becomes a detail of the background, a lukewarm memory almost erased. I was that friend, that young man. I stayed near. I spent my whole life standing by another man's shoulder, polishing a reflection in which I saw him instead of myself. Do I regret it? No. Not because it was right or beautiful or enough, because I could not have done otherwise. Because I am a son of Nerith, and on Nerith no one leaves the field until the work is done. My work was not beautiful, no one saw it, but it was done. And I understood something else. Perhaps the history of the chapter is not only what is written in the Book of the Dead and displayed in the reliquary. Perhaps part of it lives in the hands of men like me, in fingers that know every bolt of every plate, in ears that heard a captain in fever speak the name of his childhood friend, in legs that stood by an infirmary door because leaving was impossible, in eyes that saw them true. Not in formation, not beneath banners, as they are beneath the armor. No one will write that part of the history, but it was there and it was real. Theron will come to the reliquary tomorrow at 6 in the morning. I will tell him to take a brush. We will clean helms together, silently or almost silently. Perhaps he will ask a question, perhaps not. Perhaps we will simply stand beside one another and do the work, each with his own pain, each with his own story, each with a cloth in his hands. They say the chapter plans a new recruitment on Nerith. In 3 years, they will come for those boys who can run faster than others and look straight without lowering their gaze. Some will be taken, some will not. And those who are not taken, if fortune is kind, will stand here by this shelf. They will keep in order the memory of men they never knew personally. I hope someone tells them the truth before they choose to remain. No one told me in advance. I will tell Theron. That is all I can do for him, if I live until morning. I hope I live to see it.